My father fired me after believing my brother's lies. You're no longer my son, he yelled. 6 months later, I handed him the evidence that destroyed everything. Now my brother is begging for help. I stood frozen at the door of the office, feeling the weight of the words still echoing in my ears. It felt like the ground had opened up beneath me and swallowed everything I knew. You're no longer my son. Those words, coming from my father, the man who'd built everything I worked for, the man I'd given 12 years of my life to, cut deeper than any betrayal I could have imagined. The company I worked for was Parker Industrial, a third-generation family business that my grandfather had started in a garage. My father Larry had turned it into a $40 million manufacturing powerhouse, specializing in hydraulic components and specialty fasteners. Asphalt at the very bottom, at 23, loading trucks on cold mornings before the sun came up, and I'd worked my way up running scent machines, handling inventory, and negotiating supplier contracts. It was grueling. It was my life, my legacy in the making. Then there was Sean, my younger brother by 2 years. He'd breezed through life with charm, and an ability to make people like him without lifting a finger. While I was pulling double shifts in the warehouse, Sean was at state school, getting his business degree, paid for, of course, by our father. At 25, Sean walked into the company as vice president of sales. No warehouse time, no years of learning the ropes, just a corner office, a company car, and a salary that made my 12 years of work seem laughable. My father called it strategic placement. I called it favoritism. For as long as I could remember, I was the one who worked hard. Shaman was the golden child, and I was always just a little too much like our grandfather, the machinist. To my father, being good with your hands meant you weren't cut out for the executive suit. When I started noticing things. Small things at first: inventory discrepancies, purchase orders for materials that never arrived, expense reports from Sean's sales trips that didn't add up. It was nothing huge, just a few details that made my gut tighten. Had a knack for noticing patterns, a skill I'd honed over the years, knowing I'd never get the benefit of the doubt. But I never imagined the extent of it, until I started digging. One morning, a month before everything blew up, I found something that didn't sit right in the numbers. A small but glaring inconsistency. I asked my father if he wanted me to audit the sales department's expenses. The look on his face told me everything I needed to know. The color drained from his cheeks, his eyes narrowed. He looked at me like I'd just accused Sean of murder. You questioning your brother's work, Kai? He snapped. I backed off immediately, trying to smooth things over. I didn't want to cause trouble, but the doubt festered. It wasn't until I pulled in Arthur Castellano, the company's CFO, that I understood how deep the rot went. Arthur had been with the company for 23 years, old school, the kind of guy who trusted his own math more than computers. We sat down one afternoon and went through the quarterly reports. He didn't say anything for a long time, just scribbled down numbers, crossing out mistakes. Then he looked up at me, his face pale. You're right, he said quietly. Something's off. Could be as high as $500,000. My stomach dropped. $500,000. That was the kind of number that could destroy a company. I looked at Arthur, who took a deep breath, unsure if he should speak. But, Kai, he said, your father's not going to want to hear this. You know how he is about Sean. No. My father had never looked at Sean, and thought he could do anything wrong. And now here I was, about to be the whistleblower in a family business I'd given my heart to for 12 years. And I was naive enough to think that blood and business ethics would win out over favoritism. I was wrong. I spent the next 3 days preparing the evidence of bank statements, purchase orders, shipping manifests, ports, everything organized in a binder, tabs marked, sections highlighted like I was preparing for a court case. Because, in a way I was. On the Thursday afternoon in late March, I walked into my father's office with Sean lounging in the leather chair by the window. The scene was too familiar. Sean, all confident charm, and me, the hardworking son with a lifetime of sacrifice behind me. I laid out the evidence, explained the discrepancies, pointed out the patterns. I thought my father would listen. That he would hear the facts and do the right thing. Instead, when I finished, he didn't ask questions. Didn't look at the binder. He stood up slowly, his face redder than I'd ever seen it. You brought me in here to accuse your brother of theft. He barked. I'm showing you irregularities that need investigation, I said, my voice calm even though my heart was pounding. Irregularities. He spat the word, his face twisted with rage. And looking for ways to undermine Sean since he joined. Because you're jealous. Because he's better at his job than you've ever been. Sean didn't say a word. He just sat there, wearing that smug smile of his, enjoying every second of it. My father's voice cracked with emotion. Well, tell me what's really going on here. You've been working yourself into a frenzy over nothing, Kai. You've been under stress. You can't handle the pressure. He didn't even acknowledge the evidence in front of him. The lies were easier for him to accept than the truth. My heart sank as I realized what was happening. And then he said it. I think it's time we figured out what to do with you. Lendy, we need to give you some time to think about your future here. His words were the last blow I could take. My father, the man who had taught me the value of hard work, of loyalty, had just chosen his golden boy over his own son. He wasn't interested in the truth. He was interested in preserving the image of his perfect family. I stood there in shock as security was called to escort me out of the building. My father didn't even look at me as I left the office. The world I had built was crumbling in front of me, and I had no idea where to go from here. I spent the next few days in a haze, walking through life as if it was someone else's. I didn't know what to do with myself. I was fired. I had no job, no income, no purpose. I had been tossed aside. Everything I had worked for felt meaningless. The sting of my father's words, "You're no longer my son," still echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of the betrayal. The financial fallout hit quickly. Ain't the car, the company apartment, they were all part of the package, but none of it was mine. I had nothing. I wasn't prepared for how quickly everything would unravel. I remember standing in the empty apartment, looking at the few things I owned: clothes, a broken laptop, a few boxes of personal items, and realizing that it wasn't much. I had nothing outside of Parker Industrial. I spent the next few days going through the motions. Calling my landlord, trying to explain my sudden loss of income, only to be met with cold silence. Trying to cancel utilities that were tied to the company, but it felt like I was unraveling a web I couldn't escape. Sham was never far from my mind. I could see his face, that smug grin he wore whenever he won, whenever he knew he'd manipulated his way to the top. I remembered how he used to charm our father, how effortlessly he'd been placed into that VP position, while I did the grunt work. I'd spent 12 years building the company, earning respect from every employee, every vendor, and yet Sean, with his smooth talking and polished suit, walked in and instantly had more power than I ever would. It was always like that between us. Sean could do no wrong, and I could do no right. Our father had always made sure to remind me that Sean had people skills, the kind that made him a natural for sales. While I had the tough skills of a machinist, of someone who knew how to build something with their hands. To my father, that wasn't enough. And that's why, when I finally noticed the discrepancies in the books, and knew no one would believe me. It wasn't paranoia. It was a gut feeling that something was off. Little things at first: missing inventory, payments made to suppliers that didn't exist, travel expenses that seemed inflated, but no one would listen, not my father, not anyone. I remember the day I mentioned it to him. I was sitting across from him in his office, and I could feel the tension in the air as I told him I was noticing discrepancies in Sean's department. I thought he'd at least be curious, would at least hear me out. Instead, he got defensive right away. His face turned red, his voice rising. "You questioning your brother's work, Kai?" I backed off immediately. Of course, I didn't want to cause a scene, didn't want to appear like I was trying to undermine Sean. But I couldn't help it. There was something there. Something that felt wrong, something that could not be ignored. I sat down with Arthur Castellano, the company's CFO. Arthur had been with the company longer than anyone, and he was the last person who would accuse anyone of dishonesty. He trusted the numbers, I trusted him. I brought in the same evidence I'd shown my father: the irregularities, the payments to non-existent vendors, the overblown expenses. Arthur was silent for a long time, scribbling numbers on his legal pad, cross-referencing data. When he looked up at me, his face was ashen. "You're right," he said, "something's off. But I'm not sure your father will believe it. You know how he is about Sean." I didn't want to believe it, but I knew he was right. My father would never side with me. Not when it came to Sean. The more I thought about it, the more the situation started to sink in. I wasn't just fighting for the company. I was fighting for my place in the family. Fally had already made it clear where his loyalty lay. But if Sean was stealing from the company, if he was embezzling, then it was my responsibility to stop it. It was my job to protect what my grandfather had built. But the reality of the situation hit me harder than I expected. I was alone. Arthur, despite being the only one who understood the severity of the situation, had his own interests. He wasn't going to risk his pension to stand by me and my father. It was already too deep into Sean's lies to turn back now. Still, I wasn't about to give up. I couldn't. I spent the next few days gathering more evidence, organizing documents, cross-referencing financial statements, making a detailed report. It felt like I was preparing for a court case. I was meticulously putting together a file that would expose everything. But I had no idea how to bring it to light, or if anyone would even care. I remember standing in front of the mirror one night, holding the binder in my hands. I knew what I had to do next. I had to confront my father, confront Sean, lay out the evidence in front of them and hope they would see the truth. But deep down, I knew it was futile. My father had already made up his mind. I wasn't his son anymore. No matter how much evidence I had, no matter how much truth I laid out in front of him, it wouldn't matter. Not when Sean had already sealed my fate. I walked into the office that afternoon, the binder heavy in my hands. I'd heart pounding in my chest. I had everything I needed to prove Sean's theft, but I was about to learn the hardest lesson of all. I wasn't just fighting for my job. I was fighting for my place in a family that had already decided I didn't belong. I spent the next few weeks on a mission, but it wasn't a mission I ever thought I'd be on. Every day, I woke up in a fog, my mind too clouded with rage, shame, and disbelief to focus clearly. The world had turned on its axis when my father kicked me out. But now, the world felt like it was closing in. I knew I couldn't walk away from this. Not when there was something deeper at play. Not when I'd spent 12 years in a company that should have been mine, only to be tossed out because Sean had decided he wanted more. So I dug in. If no one else would listen, I would do it myself. The numbers that wouldn't leave my mind. I started pulling every financial document I could get my hands on. Expense reports, purchase orders, contracts, anything. I filled an old, tattered binder with every scrap of paper I could find. I organized them by month, by vendor, by the amounts involved. I ran my fingers over each sheet, hoping I'd missed something, some little detail that would explain the mess. But every page pointed back to the same thing: Sean was stealing. And my father was either blind or choosing not to see it. Every time I sat at the table with the binder in front of me, I felt like I was suffocating. The weight of what I was uncovering hit me harder than I expected. This wasn't just my future at stake. This wasn't just a family betrayal. Sean was destroying the company my grandfather had built. The one that had been passed down through the generations. And my father was too blinded by favoritism to see it. I was no longer just fighting for my job. I was fighting for everything. My family, my legacy, my honor. I had to see this through, but it wasn't easy. Every time I thought I was on the verge of something, I was met with dead ends. Amers who didn't exist, payments that had no corresponding orders. It felt like chasing shadows. And then there was Arthur. Arthur Castellano had been this foe for over 20 years, a man who could add up numbers faster than most people could blink. I trusted him like family. But when I showed him the discrepancies, he grew quiet. Too quiet. You're right, he admitted, after a long, tense silence. But I'm telling you, Kai, your father's not going to want to hear this. I know how he is about Sean. I was beginning to get the picture. Arthur wasn't going to help me. Not really. He was too scared. His pension, his career, all of it would crumble if he stood by me. I could see the hesitation in his eyes when he said he couldn't get involved. You've got to drop this, Kai, he warned, his voice low and serious. I've known your father a long time. He'll never believe it. He's already made his choice. That was the moment the gravity of everything hit me. I wasn't just up against Sean. I was up against my father, my entire family, and the worst part, they would never see me as the good son, the loyal one. I'd always be the problem. I didn't stop though. I couldn't. I just kept digging deeper, every day. When I wasn't scoring through the company's records, I was walking the streets, calling vendors, pulling threads. The more I pieced together, the more I realized how deep Sean's web went. Fake vendors, inflated expenses, kickbacks. Had been operating like a silent parasite for years. Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. Arthur reached out to me. I'd been sitting in a cheap diner, trying to forget about the mess I was in, while my phone buzzed. It was a text from Arthur. One line: I have something for you. Meet me. When I walked into his office that evening, Arthur was waiting, his desk piled high with papers. He didn't say a word as he handed me a small flash drive. I couldn't do this before, he said, his voice thick with regret. But now, I think you need this. I took the flash drive from him, feeling the weight of what it represented. It was the evidence I needed, the full scope of Sean's theft. It was everything: transaction logs, fake invoices, financial records showing how Sean had been siphoning money for years. I stared at the drive in my hand, feeling like the floor had just dropped away beneath me. It wasn't just proof anymore. It was the hammer that would bring it all down. I didn't thank Arthur. There was nothing left to say. I walked out of his office with a purpose, a mission. I was going to bring this to my father, and didn't care if he believed me or not. But I had to try. The plan was simple, or so I thought. I would lay everything out, show him what Sean had done. I had the proof now, and it was undeniable. As I stood in front of my father's office door, staring at the nameplate with my family's name on it, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't going to be enough. No matter how much evidence I had, no matter how solid my case was, my father had already made up his mind. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. You may want to sit down for this, I said, as I walked in and placed the binder and the flash drive on his desk. My father didn't even look up. His eyes were fixed on the papers in front of him, the lines of his face tightening as I began to speak. This is the evidence, I said quietly, my voice steady. Sean's been stealing from the company. Here's the proof. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he stood up slowly, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. His face was red, his jaw clenched. "You brought me in here to accuse your brother of theft." His voice was ice cold. "I'm not accusing him. I'm showing you the facts. The manners don't lie. You've been looking for ways to undermine Sean since he joined." My father spat, his voice rising. "You're jealous, Kai. You always have been. He's better at his job than you've ever been." I opened my mouth to argue, but the words caught in my throat. Sean wasn't here to defend himself. And my father was too far gone, too attached to the idea of the golden child to see the truth. And just like that, it was over. He turned to Sean, who had been sitting in the corner, silent until now. With a calm, measured voice he said, "I think it's time we figured out what to do with you, Kai." The finality of his words hit me like a punch in the stomach. This wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about my family. And I wasn't part of it anymore. I grabbed the binder, walked out of the office, didn't look back. "Goodbye, Dad," I whispered to myself, the words bitter on my tongue. Walked in the office, the binder heavy in my hands, the flash drive tucked safely inside. My father's office felt colder than usual, a sterile chill that made it impossible to breathe. Sean was already there, lounging in his chair by the window, the smug expression never far from his face. He didn't look up when I entered. I could already hear the lies he'd spin to my father. This was it, the moment I'd been preparing for. Everything I'd worked for, every sleepless night poring over documents, every moment I spent convincing myself I was doing the right thing. It had all led to this confrontation. I set the binder and the flash drive down on my father's polished desk, the sound of it landing almost too loud in the silence. "I need you to look at this," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. My father finally looked up from the papers in front of him. His eyes narrowed when he saw the binder, but he didn't say anything. I could tell he was already preparing himself to dismiss me, to dismiss the evidence, but I pressed on. "This is the evidence. Sean's been stealing from the company," I said, the words tasting bitter as they left my mouth. It was the truth, the whole truth. But how could my father, my own father, accept it? How can he reconcile the son he had favored, the son who could do no wrong, with the possibility of that son being a criminal? I watched as my father slowly opened the binder. For a moment, I thought maybe he'd take a closer look, maybe he'd hear me out. But instead, he just flipped through the pages without much interest. "You brought me in here to accuse your brother of theft." My father's voice cracked through the air, sharp and dismissive. "This is ridiculous, Kai." I clenched my jaw, trying not to let the rage bubble up. "It's not ridiculous. This is proof. I've been going over the records for weeks. You have to see what's going on. And looking for ways to undermine Sean since he joined." My father spat, throwing the binder aside. "You're jealous. You've always been jealous. Sean has people skills. He's the natural choice for VP, not you." I wanted to scream at him. Tell him he was blind, that his vision of Sean was nothing but an illusion. But my voice was stuck. I couldn't even bring myself to fight back. Sean sat there, his grin stretching wider with every word our father spoke. He had already won. He didn't need to say a word. "I'm not jealous," I said quietly, the words almost losing themselves in the hum of the office. "I'm trying to protect the company." The air in the room was suffocating. I could feel my chest tightening with every passing second, every word my father spoke. He wasn't listening. He wasn't even trying to understand. He was too caught up in his own narrative. The one where Sean could do no wrong. The one where I had always been the disappointment. My father's eyes glinted with anger as he stood up from behind his desk. His voice boomed as he spoke. "This is a waste of time. You want to destroy everything, Kai. You've been tearing this family apart, trying to make Sean look bad, when all he's ever done is work hard to help this company grow." I could feel the anger rising, boiling over. He was turning everything on me, twisting it into something it wasn't. And Sean, the architect of this whole mess, just sat there, silent, letting the storm rage around him. "Sean hasn't done anything wrong," my father said, his voice hardening with each word. "You're just bitter because he's done everything I ever asked of him." That's not true," I interrupted, my voice sharper now, the frustration cracking through. "Sean's been stealing from you. From all of us. How can you not see that?" But he was done listening. He looked at me with contempt, his face pale with the effort of keeping his temper in check. "I think it's time we figured out what to do with you, Kai," my father said, his tone cold. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. My father, the man who had taught me everything I knew about business, the man who I had respected, was choosing to believe Sean over me. This wasn't just a company betrayal. This was personal. He had already decided where his loyalty lay, and it wasn't with me. 2 weeks without pay, my father said, his voice quieter now but still firm. "Take that time to think about your future here. Maybe it's time you figure out if you want to stay with this family business, or if you want to keep accusing your brother." I couldn't breathe. My father had just made his decision, and it wasn't me. He wasn't interested in hearing the truth. He wasn't even going to consider the possibility that Sean had betrayed him. He had already labeled me the enemy. I stood there stunned, feeling the weight of his words crushing me. Hank worked for 12 years for this company. And now, it felt like it had all been for nothing. Without another word, my father turned away, as if dismissing me. He didn't even look at me as I turned and walked out of the office. Sean, of course, stayed silent through the whole thing, letting my father destroy me. But he didn't need to say anything. He had already won. "Goodbye, Dad," I whispered under my breath, my voice trembling with the weight of everything that had just happened. But he didn't hear me. I walked out of the office and didn't look back. The days after my suspension blurred together. I found myself sinking further into a hole, a place I hadn't anticipated being. The financial strain hit quickly. My company car was gone, the apartment, company owned, everything I had was tied to Parker Industrial. And now, without a job, without my father's support, I had nothing. I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind reeling as I tried to grasp the reality of what had happened. The walls of the apartment, once a source of comfort, now felt suffocating. I had nothing left but the binder I'd put together, and the flash drive Arthur had given me. And even that felt hollow now, a symbol of betrayal more than hope. I thought I'd be able to confront my father, expose Sean's theft, and fix things. But instead I'd been discarded, left to fend for myself while the truth was buried under lies. I tried calling a few people, friends, old colleagues, but the answers were always the same. They were sympathetic, but no one could help. "Sorry man. I can't help you out right now," or, "I've heard about what happened. It's a bad look, you know." The one person who had agreed to help me couldn't offer anything meaningful. I called him twice, trying to get some kind of support, but each time, he seemed more distant. Finally, I got him on the phone. His voice soft, hesitant. "Kai, I can't do this. I've got my own job to think about. I can't risk losing it." It hit me like a slap to the face. Arthur, the man I had trusted, was choosing self-preservation over doing the right thing. It shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. I thought I could count on him, that at least one person in the company would see the truth. But now, it was clear. I was on my own. I didn't know how long I stayed in that apartment, and it felt like weeks. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't think. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that everything had been taken from me, my family, my job, my future. And then I hit rock bottom. I had no money left. My savings were dwindling, and I couldn't keep putting off the inevitable. I had to leave the apartment. I had to find a way to survive. I packed up everything I could into 2 duffel bags, and threw them in the trunk of my car. There wasn't much to take. Just clothes and a few personal items. I sold my car the next day. What was the point of keeping it? It had been company property, after all. I traded it in for a used sedan that barely ran. My pride was gone, but my survival instincts kicked in. For the next few days, I slept in my car, parked at a different spot every night, moving to avoid the security guards who would inevitably tell me to move along. I spent my days walking around, filling out job applications on my phone, trying to find a way back into the workforce. But nothing was working. I didn't even have a stable address to put on my resume. I had to use a friend's address for a while. But even they were getting uncomfortable with my situation. One night, lying in the back seat of my car, the cold creeping in as the heater barely worked. The thought of how low I'd fallen struck me like a punch to the gut. I'd spent 12 years building a career at Parker Industrial, working my ass off to prove my worth. And now, I was living in a car. My father had tossed me out like a piece of trash, and Sean was sitting in a corner office, untouched by the mess he'd created. Add about the people I used to work with, Jerry from the warehouse, the guys who'd worked beside me in the trenches. I wondered how they saw me now. Did they believe the lies Sean had told? Did they think I was guilty too? Did anyone even care that I was gone? A part of me wanted to reach out to them, to explain that I was innocent, that I hadn't stolen anything. But what would be the point? Had no proof, no allies, and Sean with his charm, had already won everyone over. Was a ghost to them now. I spent days like this, sleeping in my car, walking around, avoiding eye contact with people who knew me, and filling out job applications. But despite everything, there was something in me that refused to give up. There was a fire inside me that kept me going. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving the truth. After a long day of rejection calls and more job searches, I sat at the corner of a cheap diner, staring at the flash drive Arthur had given me. It felt heavier than before. I had everything I needed to take Sean down. It was time to go back to the heart of the problem, to confront my father, to force him to see the truth. But I knew it wasn't going to be easy. My father wasn't going to accept it. Sean was too well entrenched, but I wasn't backing down. I had nothing left, but I could still fight. So, I began my next step. I started tracking down the vendors listed in the documents. I began cross-referencing every name, every company, every invoice. My focus sharpened, and knew I was digging into a hole that could swallow me whole, but I didn't care anymore. I had one mission now: find the proof, expose Sean, and clear my name. And somewhere along the way, a small part of me began to feel something I hadn't felt in weeks: hope. The full scale of Sean's theft hit me all at once: $892,000 over 3 years. The evidence was clear now, undeniable. I had spent weeks poring over records, cross-referencing vendors' invoices, and bank transfers. And it tracked down ghost suppliers, fake purchase orders, and a web of kickbacks that stretched across months. It wasn't just a few bad transactions, it was an entire criminal enterprise built inside the family business. I had the numbers, the dates, the signatures. Everything. Ankle nowhere else to go but up. I sat at the small, dingy table in my tiny apartment, the glow of the laptop screen reflecting off my face. Each file I opened only made it clearer. Sean had been a parasite, feeding off our father's trust while systematically draining the company. I knew I had to do something with it, but the weight of the task was suffocating. Exposing Sean wasn't just about proving him guilty, it was about bringing down everything my father had worked for. My Sean was going down. My father's empire would collapse with him. I had thought that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for me to go back and fix things. But with every document I reviewed, that hope faded. But there's no going back. But I couldn't stop myself. I couldn't let Sean walk away from this. Not after everything. I spent the next few days organizing the evidence into a digital file that I could present. Color coded everything: purchase orders, expense reports, emails between Sean and suppliers. It was a painstaking process, but it was the only way to ensure I wouldn't miss anything. Once it was ready, I'd know what to do with it. I had no allies left at Parker Industrial. Arthur had already made it clear he was staying neutral, preserving his own career at all costs. My father had already decided whose side he was on, and it wasn't mine. That's when I thought of Connolly Manufacturing. Family had been a rival company for years, always looking to expand. I'd heard rumors that they were eyeing Parker Industrial as an acquisition. If they could see the evidence I had, if they could see the rot inside Parker, and they would step in. Maybe they could take down Sean, and with him, my father's legacy. But they would need to see the evidence. They'd need proof, and I had that. I reached out to Adrian, the Bob acquisitions at Connolly. He had always been a no-nonsense kind of guy, someone who didn't deal in family drama or soft negotiations. He was all business. I didn't expect him to take me seriously, but I knew I had to try. I summoned an email with the subject line, Parker Industrial Financial Irregularities. The next morning, I received a reply. Meet me tomorrow at noon. Bring everything. I didn't hesitate. I put the flash drive in my bag, grabbed the binder with the hard copies of the evidence, and headed out. This was the moment. I was about to face the consequences of everything I had been through, everything I had uncovered, and I had no idea what would happen after. When I arrived at Connolly's headquarters, I was greeted by a secretary who led me to a sleek conference room. Adrian was already there, sitting behind a large glass table, his eyes scanning a stack of papers in front of him. He didn't look up when I walked in. He said, his voice flat, business-like. I set the binder and flash drive down in front of him, trying not to show how my hands were shaking. This was my last shot. If Adrian didn't believe me, if he didn't take the evidence seriously, I was out of options. He didn't waste any time. He grabbed the flash drive and plugged it into his laptop, pulling up the files on the screen. I watched his face as he scrolled through the documents, his expression unreadable. His eyes flicked between the screen and me, but he didn't say anything. Do you need me to explain this? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. No, Adrian said, his tone cutting through the tension. I can read. He clicked through the files, his brow furrowing as he processed the numbers. I could feel the seconds stretch out, each one weighing heavier than the last. I was so close to the edge of something, but I didn't know if this would be the moment I fell or the moment I finally got out. He sat back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. Oh, this is extensive, he said, his eyes narrowing. Dow at $892,000 in embezzlement. Over 3 years. This is bad, very bad. I nodded, my heart hammering in my chest. It's only the tip of the iceberg. Shamley had been covering his tracks. But I found the pattern. Adrian paused, then turned his gaze on me. You realize what you're asking, right? If we move forward with this, it's not just a business deal, it's a full-on corporate war. Your family's legacy will collapse. Ifama will lose everything. I know, I said. My voice barely above a whisper. But he'll lose everything anyway if no one does anything. Adrian leaned forward, his fingers tapping the table as he processed everything. I could see the wheels turning in his head, weighing the risks. After a long silence, he exhaled and leaned back. You're right, he said, meeting my eyes. This isn't just about Parker Industrial anymore. It's about saving what's left of it. I could feel a strange sense of relief wash over me. tempered with the heavy cost of what this would mean. So you'll help me? Adrian paused again, his eyes hardening. I'll help you, he said, his voice resolute. But this is your fight. We'll bring it to the board, to the investors. We'll make sure Sean's name is ruined. And we'll make sure Parker's assets are liquidated. Thank you, I said, almost too quietly. He stood up and extended his hand. You've got one shot, Kai. Don't waste it. I shook his hand. The weight of everything I'd been through settling on my shoulders. This was it. The final chance to bring Sean down, to take back everything that had been stolen from me. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I was finally in control. And this time, I wouldn't let anyone take that away from me. The email from Connolly came the next morning. I hadn't expected it to be this fast. Adrian's reply was short, sharp, read everything. Let's make this happen. When he's act now. I stared at the screen, feeling the weight of it all crash down on me. For months, I'd been scrambling, trying to find someone who would listen. Now, there was a real chance. Connolly was serious. And at Parker. And they wanted to buy it at a fraction of its worth. The idea of it filled me with a bitter satisfaction. They had to know the truth now. My father's empire was about to be sold for pennies on the dollar. And Sean would be exposed for what he truly was. The next few days were a blur. Adrian arranged for a meeting with the board of directors. I could see the path forming clearly now. Connolly would offer an acquisition deal, and the board would have no choice but to accept it, especially with the financial issues at Parker so evident. I had the evidence, and now the company's survival depended on the decision they'd make. But, as I prepared to move forward, something gnawed at me, a strange sense of guilt, perhaps. My father's company, the one he'd spent his life building, was on the edge of collapse. And even though he had disowned me, even though I knew what Sean had done, part of me still felt the weight of everything that was about to happen. This wasn't just about business. It was about family. My family. That night, my father's health took a turn. The phone call came at around 9 p.m. My father had been admitted to the hospital after what appeared to be a mild heart attack. The doctors assured us he was stable, but it was enough to throw everything off course. The timing was inconvenient, to say the least. But this wasn't just a stroke of bad luck. It felt like a final turn in the long chain of events. Parker Industrial, the company that had defined our lives, was unraveling in every direction. The next morning, out ankle Adrian at Connelly's headquarters. There was a different energy in the air today. No more polite introductions or tentative conversations. This is the real deal. I talked to the board, Adrian said, his voice low but certain. They're in. We're making an offer. He slid a proposal across the table. Parker Industrial for $18 million, a fraction of its previous worth. I knew exactly what that meant. My father would never accept it. The idea of selling the company for so little would destroy him. But he didn't have a choice. The board had already signed off on it. It was a done deal. We'll bring this to him as a rescue offer, Adrian said. It's not about saving the business anymore. It's about saving what's left. It wasn't about saving the company. It was about saving what was left of my father's pride. The next few days were a whirlwind. A financial audit came in, and the truth was laid bare. Sean's thefts were confirmed. Every fake vendor, every kickback, every inflated expense report. There was no denying it now. The damage was worse than anyone had imagined. 2000. I watched the board's reaction as the numbers were presented. Adrian was right. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about survival. I could hear Sean's voice in my head, the smug tone he'd always had when things went his way. But now, as the board prepared to act, I couldn't help but feel a rush of cold vindication. The tables were turning. Then it happened. Sean tried to leave. A day after the audit results were announced, news broke that Sean had booked a flight, one way to Cancun. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sean, thinking he could escape the consequences, thinking he could get away with it all, he had no idea what was coming. I was watching the news when the call came. He's at the airport, Adrian told me, his voice terse. The authorities are on their way. It didn't take long. Within hours, Sean was arrested at the gate. Federal charges: wire fraud, bank fraud, and embezzlement. As he was carted off in cuffs, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and regret. There was no joy in seeing him brought low. Watching him, his somnolent brother who'd once looked up to our father in the same way I had. The same way I still did. And yet, here we were. Everything my father had built was falling apart because of Sean's greed. That afternoon, my father had a mild heart attack. He was rushed to the hospital. The weight of everything finally taking its toll. It was like everything had finally caught up to him. And I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy. Even after everything that had happened, my father was a man who had dedicated his life to Parker Industrial. Who'd built something from nothing, and now, it was all crumbling around him. The heart attack wasn't fatal, but it changed the course of everything. The foam in the hospital, the full weight of the scandal hit him. And there was no turning back. Parker is dead, I said quietly to Adrian that night, staring at the offer on the table. The truth of it felt like a punch in the gut. Everything he worked for is gone. But Adrian just nodded. It's over, Kai. But he paused. You did what you had to do. As I left Connolly's office that evening, the weight of everything settled over me like a lead blanket. I had exposed the truth. Light had brought Sean down, but I couldn't help but wonder if, in the end, I had lost something much more important than just a family business. The hospital room felt cold, sterile, and empty, despite my father lying in the bed, looking smaller, weaker, and more fragile than I had ever seen him. I stood in the doorway, my hands stuffed in my jacket pockets, my mind wrestling with the irony of it all. At everything, after months of fighting to expose the truth, this was where it had led. Mara hospital room, where my father lay recovering from a heart attack, facing the consequences of his own choices. I hadn't seen him in weeks. Not since the day he dismissed me, told me I was no longer his son, and kicked me out of the company I had worked so hard for. And resentment had simmered, grown stronger with every passing day, but as I stood there now, watching him struggle to breathe, I couldn't help but feel nothing. The door opened behind me, and I turned to see Arthur standing there. He looked worn, tired, his face lined with the same guilt that had been heavy in my chest for months. He gave a short nod, acknowledging my presence but saying nothing. Is he going to be okay? I asked, my voice a little more bitter than I intended. Arthur hesitated. The doctors say he'll be fine, but I wouldn't be so sure. His eyes lingered on my father's frail form. The stress, it's been too much. I nodded. Both knew that this moment, this breakdown, had been coming for a long time. And now that it had arrived, I couldn't bring myself to feel anything but an emptiness. A hollow feeling where all my anger and frustration had once been. Arthur shifted uncomfortably. You're here, though, he said quietly. You came back. I looked at him, my heart heavy with everything we had been through. I came because of him, I said, my gaze drifting back to my father. But I don't know why anymore. Arthur stepped closer. You've always been the one who tried to make things right. Even when he was blind to what was happening, you stuck by him. That counts for something, does it? I asked, unable to hide the bitterness in my voice. Gave him everything, 12 years of my life. And this is what I get in return. On tester to my father, still unconscious in the bed. You can't fix what's broken, Arthur. You can't put the pieces back together after everything he's done. Arthur didn't respond. He knew better than to try. So we both stood there in silence, each lost in our own thoughts, each wrestling with the weight of the betrayal that had shattered everything. Finally, I moved towards my father's bed. I looked down at his worn face, the face that had once been filled with pride and confidence. And now, all I saw was a man broken by his own decisions. The weight of that was too much to bear, even after all the years of anger and hurt. I reached out and touched his hand, feeling the coldness of it. Always thought I was the one who would destroy everything, didn't you? I whispered. You always thought I wasn't good enough. But it was never me, it was you, Dad. You chose Sean. And now, look where we are. I didn't expect an answer, and I didn't get one. But the weight of my own decision settled over me, heavier than any guilt I had ever known. There was nothing left to fix, nothing left to save. Arthur cleared his throat. You should talk to him. Before it's too late. I didn't answer right away. The thought of speaking to him, of confronting the man who had destroyed everything, was almost too much to bear. But I knew I had to. If only for myself. I sat down in the chair next to his bed, taking a deep breath. I wasn't sure what I was going to say. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything, Dad. I began, my voice quieter than I had intended. You don't get to just erase everything, what we had, what we built. It doesn't just disappear because you don't want to see it anymore. I paused, the anger slowly rising within me again. But it doesn't matter anymore. We're done. The words felt final, a weight lifted from my chest. After everything, after all the hurt and betrayal, it was over. On had stepped back, giving me space, but I could feel his eyes on me. I didn't care. We're done, I repeated, my voice more certain now. You disowned me 6 months ago. Consider it mutual. I didn't wait for a response. There was nothing more to say. My father wasn't the man I had thought he was. The man who had built an empire with his bare hands. He had chosen Sean, and in doing so, he had destroyed everything. And now, as he lay in that bed, clinging to life, I knew that he would never understand the damage he had caused. I stood up, brushing past Arthur as I walked out of the room. There was nothing more for me here. I didn't look back as I left the hospital. My mind was already 1,000 miles away from Parker Industrial and everything it had represented. I had a new life now. A new beginning. And it was time to start living it.